The great glass dome of the Grand Academy caught the light of three suns at once, throwing colors across the marble floors like a slow rainbow that never stopped moving. Students from a dozen worlds walked beneath that light every day, and most of them barely noticed it anymore. Wonder became normal when you lived inside it long enough. The academy sat at the center of a small moon that had been hollowed out and rebuilt over 500 years. It was not a school in the small sense of the word. It was the place where the smartest young minds of the galaxy came to prove themselves, to be shaped into scientists, thinkers, and leaders who would one day guide entire star systems. Getting in was hard, staying in was harder, and graduating with honors from the Advanced Cognition program was something only a handful of students managed each generation. Daniel Reyes did not come from a world known for its brilliance. Humans had only joined the wider galactic community a few decades ago, and many of the older species still saw them as new arrivals, barely past their own growing pains. Some aliens were polite about this. Others were not. Daniel had learned to let most of it slide off him like rain on a window. He sat near the back of the lecture hall, a large circular room built to hold students of many different shapes and sizes. Some of his classmates had 4 arms. Some had skin that shimmered when they were nervous. One had no visible eyes at all, but somehow always knew when someone was staring at her. Daniel found all of it fascinating rather than strange. He had grown up reading about the stars, and now he sat among people who came from them. Around him, the other students talked in quiet, confident voices about the exam that was coming. It was not just any exam. It was the final question, a single problem given at the end of every advanced course, one that had a strange kind of fame across the entire academy. In 500 years, no student, from any species, had ever solved it in the time given. Some had come close. Most had failed completely. A few had walked out of the room in tears. "It is simply a matter of preparation," said a tall student with pale blue skin, adjusting the data pad strapped to his wrist. "My people have studied every known version of the question. We will not fail where others failed." Another student, small and quick in her movements, laughed softly. "Everyone says that before the exam. Then they walk out looking like they saw a ghost." Daniel listened without joining in. He had heard about the final question since his first week at the academy. Older students spoke of it the way sailors once spoke of storms at sea, with a mix of respect and fear. Nobody knew exactly what made it so difficult. It was not a simple math problem or a memory test. It was something else, something that seemed to break the usual rules of thinking that most students had been trained to follow their whole lives. At the front of the room, the doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the class fell silent almost at once. Director Ilvos walked in, moving slowly, the way old and important people often do, as if time itself had learned to wait for them. Ilvos was one of the oldest teachers at the academy, a member of a species that lived for centuries and had seen more history than most planets could remember. Rumors said Ilvos had personally written parts of the academy's curriculum long before most of the students in the room had been born. "Tomorrow," Ilvos said, in a voice that was calm but carried easily to every corner of the hall, "you will face the final question. I will not tell you what it is. I will not tell you how to prepare. I will only tell you this. In 500 years, this question has never been answered within the time given. Many have tried. All have failed." A ripple of nervous energy moved through the room. Daniel noticed the confident blue-skinned student sit up a little straighter, as if accepting a challenge meant just for him. "Do not come to me afterward asking why you failed," Ilvos continued. "The question does not care about your intelligence, your species, or your reputation. It asks something simple, and yet almost no mind has ever answered it in time." The class ended soon after, but the mood in the hallways stayed heavy the rest of the day. Small groups of students gathered outside classrooms, trading theories about what the question might involve. Some believed it was a trick of language. Others thought it tested memory across impossible amounts of information. A few, only half joking, said it was designed to be unsolvable on purpose, just to remind students that some things were bigger than their own cleverness. Daniel walked back to his room alone, passing under the great dome again as the 3 suns began to set together, turning the sky outside into layers of orange and violet. He thought about the exam, not with fear exactly, but with a quiet kind of curiosity. He did not know what the final question would ask. He only knew that tomorrow, for the first time since arriving at the academy, Every student in his class would be tested by the exact same problem, at the exact same time, with nowhere to hide behind species or reputation. That night, while many of his classmates studied deep into the dark hours, running through old data and complex training programs, Daniel did something simpler. He sat by his window, watched the stars, and let his mind wander freely, the way it always had, long before the academy, long before the stars became something he could touch. Tomorrow would tell whether that simple habit meant anything at all. The exam hall was colder than usual the next morning, or maybe it only felt that way because of the silence. Rows of seats curved around a raised platform where Director Ilvos stood, arms folded behind a long robe that shifted color slightly with every movement. No screens glowed. No data pads buzzed. Every device had been collected at the door, leaving each student with nothing but their own mind and a single blank writing pad. Daniel sat near the middle of the room this time, not by choice, but because the seats had been assigned by an old system nobody understood anymore. To his left sat the pale blue-skinned student named Voren, who had spent half the night, according to rumors, running simulations of every past exam question he could find. To his right sat a quiet student whose species communicated partly through soft clicking sounds, calm on the outside, but tapping one clawed finger against the desk in a slow, steady rhythm that betrayed her nerves. Ilvos raised a hand, and the room fell into complete silence. "You each have 10 minutes, Ilvos said. "The question will appear on your pad the moment I finish speaking. You may not speak to each other. You may not leave the room. When your time ends, your answer ends with it, finished or not." A soft chime rang through the hall, and words appeared on every pad at once. The question itself looked deceptively short. Daniel read it twice before letting it settle in his mind. It described a situation where a group of travelers had limited resources, an unknown threat approaching from an unknown direction, and no way to gather more information before a decision had to be made. The question did not ask for a single fixed answer. It asked what the travelers should do, and why, using only the information given, none of which was complete. Around the room, expressions began to change almost immediately. Voren's easy confidence from the day before disappeared within the first minute. His eyes moved rapidly across the pad, and his hand hovered over the writing surface without touching it, as if searching for the exact correct formula before daring to commit to anything. A tall student near the front, known for winning nearly every academic competition in his home system, began writing quickly, filling line after line with dense equations and probability models. He seemed to believe that enough calculation could force the question into giving up a clean, certain answer. Halfway through, he stopped, stared at what he had written, then started over from the beginning, his jaw tightening. Minutes passed. The soft clicking sound to Daniel's right grew faster, more uneven. The student beside him tried 3 different opening lines, crossing out each one before finishing a full sentence. Daniel understood, watching them, exactly what made the question so difficult for many of them. Most of his classmates had been trained their entire lives to search for the one correct, provable answer. Their cultures and their studies rewarded precision, certainty, clean logic that could be checked and proven true. But this question offered no such comfort. It was built entirely around missing pieces, around uncertainty that could never be fully solved, only managed. Voren finally began writing, his pen moving in short, sharp strokes. He filled his pad with careful reasoning about resource distribution and threat probability, building an answer that was technically impressive, full of structure and logic. But even as he wrote, Daniel could see the tension in his shoulders, the small pauses where he clearly doubted his own conclusions. The tall student in front gave up on his equations entirely with 2 minutes remaining and began writing a short, simple answer instead, panic pushing him toward the very approach he had avoided at the start. It was too late for that shift to feel confident. His handwriting grew messier line by line. The clicking student beside Daniel finally settled on an answer near the end, her clawed hand trembling slightly as she wrote her final words. She did not look proud when she finished. She looked exhausted. Daniel had already read the question 3 times, turning it over slowly in his mind, letting the shape of it settle before he wrote anything at all. He was not thinking about formulas or proofs. He was thinking about people, about what it actually felt like to stand somewhere unfamiliar with limited supplies and an unclear danger nearby, forced to choose without waiting for perfect certainty. It was a feeling he understood without needing to calculate it. The chime rang again, and every pad locked at once, freezing each answer exactly as it stood, finished or not. A few students let out quiet breaths of relief. Others stared at their pads with open frustration, clearly aware they had run out of time before reaching any real conclusion. Ilvos moved slowly along the rows, collecting nothing physically, since the pads transmitted everything automatically, but watching each student's face as if reading something deeper than the words they had written. When Ilvos reached Voren's row, the old teacher paused only a moment before moving on, expression unreadable. Daniel noticed something as Ilvos passed his row too. The teacher's steps slowed slightly, and for just a second, sharp old eyes studied him with an interest that seemed different from simple observation. Then Ilvos continued on, and the moment passed. No results were given that day. Ilvos simply announced that answers would be reviewed carefully, and that further discussion would follow. The class left the hall in near total silence, none of the usual chatter or theories filling the hallway afterward. Even Voren, normally quick to speak, walked out without a single word, his expression distant and uncertain. Daniel walked out last, glancing back once at the empty hall, wondering quietly what Ilvos had seen in that brief, searching look. 3 days passed before the results were posted, and in that time the entire academy seemed to hum with quiet tension. Students who normally spent their evenings in the open courtyards, talking and laughing between classes, instead kept to themselves, replaying the exam in their heads, wondering what they had missed. When the results finally appeared on the main board outside the lecture hall, a crowd gathered almost instantly. Names and scores scrolled down the screen in careful order, and a heavy silence spread through the students as they read. Every single score showed the same result. Incomplete. Unsolved. Not one student, out of the entire class, had produced an answer that satisfied the question's true demands. Voren's detailed calculations were marked as technically sound, but ultimately incomplete, missing the deeper reasoning the question required. The tall student's rushed final answer fared even worse, judged as a guess dressed up in scientific language. Even the quiet clicking student, whose answer had shown real thoughtfulness, fell short in ways the scoring system explained in dense, technical notes that few students fully understood. It was, in a strange way, exactly what everyone had expected. 500 years of failure was not broken by a single class. And yet there was something different about seeing it happen in person, watching classmates who considered themselves brilliant walk away from the board with tight, unreadable expressions. Daniel checked the board later that evening, once the crowd had thinned. He found his name near the bottom of the list, in a separate section reserved for late results still under review. Beside his name, instead of a score, was a simple note. Report to Director Ilvos immediately. He felt a small flicker of nervousness, though not the kind that came from fear of trouble. It was more curiosity than anything else, mixed with the same instinct that told him something unusual was happening. Ilvos's office sat near the top of the academy's central tower, a quiet room lined with shelves of old physical books, a rarity in an age where most information lived inside data systems. Sunlight from the setting sun spilled across the floor in long golden lines as Daniel stepped inside. Ilvos sat behind a wide desk, Daniel's exam pad glowing softly in front of the old teacher, the answer displayed clearly on its surface. Sit, Ilvos said, gesturing to a simple chair across from the desk. Daniel sat, unsure exactly what to expect. Your answer, Ilvos said slowly, was correct. For a moment, Daniel wasn't sure he had heard correctly. Correct? But the notice said incomplete for everyone. For everyone else, Ilvos corrected. Your answer was reviewed separately and confirmed independently, twice, because I did not believe what I was seeing the first time. The old teacher's eyes studied him carefully, the same searching look from the exam hall, now fully focused on him. In 500 years, no student has solved the final question within the time given. You solved it in under 30 seconds. Daniel sat in stunned silence, trying to process the weight of what he was hearing. He remembered the exam clearly, remembered reading the question twice, thinking about it briefly, then simply writing what felt true to him. It had not felt like some great struggle. It had felt almost obvious. I don't understand, Daniel admitted. It didn't feel difficult. I just thought about what I would actually do if I were really there, without knowing everything. Ilvos leaned back slowly, folding long fingers together. That is precisely the point, and precisely what almost every other student in this room, and every student before them, has failed to grasp. The question does not ask for a perfect answer built from complete information. It asks what a mind should do when complete information will never come. Most species arrive at this academy, trained from childhood to seek certainty, to calculate until doubt disappears. When doubt cannot be removed, many of them freeze, or force an answer that is not truly theirs, built instead from formulas that were never meant to carry that kind of weight. Daniel thought back to Voron's tense shoulders, to the tall student's rushed and messy final lines, to the clicking student's exhausted expression after finishing. He understood now what he had been watching without fully realizing it. You did none of that, Ilvos continued. You accepted uncertainty as a normal part of the problem, rather than an obstacle to be erased. You reasoned through it directly, using judgment rather than searching for a formula that does not exist. This is not a flaw in your species, Daniel Reyes. It appears, from what I am seeing, to be closer to a strength, one your people may not even fully recognize in yourselves. Daniel sat with that thought for a long moment, unsure how to respond. He had never thought of himself as unusually gifted. He had simply answered the way it made sense to answer, the way, he realized now, humans had likely been forced to answer difficult questions for their entire history, long before calculations and data systems existed to lean on. What happens now? Daniel finally asked. Ilvos's expression grew serious, older somehow, carrying the weight of something larger than a single exam. Now, this becomes something far bigger than a classroom result. This question was never simply a teaching tool, Daniel. Its origins go back further than the Academy itself, further than most records the galaxy still holds. And no mind, from any species, in 500 years of trying, has ever answered it the way you just did. Outside the window, the last light of the suns faded slowly into the deep colors of evening, and Daniel understood, sitting in that quiet office, that his life at the Academy had just changed in a way he could not yet fully measure. Rain fell softly against the tall windows of Ilvos's office the next morning, an unusual weather setting chosen by the Academy's environmental systems on days meant for quiet reflection. Daniel had been asked to return, this time joined by two other senior teachers he did not recognize, both older members of long-lived species who studied him with the same careful curiosity Ilvos had shown the day before. I promised you an explanation, Ilvos said, once the introductions were finished. It is time you understood exactly what the final question truly is. A soft light activated above the desk, projecting a simple image into the air. It showed a symbol, old and worn, carved into stone that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy except in historical records. The symbol was simple, 3 curved lines meeting at a single point, yet something about it felt deliberate, almost alive. Long before the Academy existed, Ilvos continued, long before most of the species you study beside today had left their home worlds, an ancient civilization